Good morning and welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. I've just returned from the International Convention of the Chabad Rabbis, a very inspiring, soul-stirring weekend in Chabad World Headquarters with so many of my colleagues and friends and their supporters. And we're back, and today we're going to learn about what it takes to become fabulously wealthy. Nice message from the weekly Torah portion. You got to live with the times, the Alter Rebbe tells us. So if this week's Torah portion is becoming fabulously wealthy, then that's what we got to do. Let's figure out how it's done. I'd like to give a special shout out to our viewers all over the world. Today I'd like to salute Gary from Oro Valley in Arizona. Received the regards through your rabbi, and we're delighted that you're here with us. So let's do this. Fran from Northern Florida, Shalom Aleichem. Today we're learning about Yitzchak. Yitzchak is a very interesting character who was obviously a character. He was our forefather. I mean, not just a character. He was a central figure in our faith. And every detail of his life is specific. The Torah tells us the stories of our patriarchs and matriarchs, not because they're just good narratives, but because they actually contain within them the templates for our success, for our flourishing, for our happiness. These are not just ordinary individuals. When the Torah tells us a story, it's not merely a historical narrative. When the Torah tells us a story, it is a guide for life. Remember, the word Torah means guide. That's what Torah means. It's a guide. Just like you follow your GPS, your ways. You don't follow your GPS just because it's cute. You follow it because you want to reach your destination. You follow the GPS, right?
I read maps.
The same thing with maps. It's the exact same thing as a map, old-fashioned, right? But when we read the Torah, what we're doing is that we're reading a map of our soul, a map to our success, to our happiness, to our sense of fulfillment. When the Torah tells us that Isaac became extremely wealthy, we've got to look into that story and to try to understand what the message is and how we might be able to apply that into our lives. Mm-hmm. So let's take a look at the story. It's on page 159. We're in the blue Kehot Chumash. The story goes as follows. Middle of the page, 159. So Isaac settled in Gerar. In the beginning of the Torah portion, Yitzchak has married Rivka. He's given birth now. They have given birth now to two children, twins, Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov is the father of the Jews. Esav is the father of the non-Jews, of the Christians. And these two children grow up very, very differently. At one point, at the beginning of the portion, Jacob purchases the birthright from Esau, but that's a different story. Becomes relevant a little bit later. But now we're in the middle page, 159. Isaac settles in Gerar. When the local people asked about his wife, he said, just as Abraham had responded regarding Sarah, she is my sister. He purposely misled them because he was afraid to say to them, she's my wife, lest he thought to himself, the local people kill me on account of Rebekah because she is of good facial complexion. People there were very, very corrupt. They had strange customs rules. They didn't just ask you if you had more than $10,000 in cash or fruits and vegetables, as they ask you today in American airports. They asked if the woman you're with is eligible. And if she wasn't eligible, then they would make her eligible. You know how a married woman becomes eligible? They can make her a widow very quickly. And then she's becoming eligible. So these were very, very strange customs of how they would operate in those days. So you had to say she's my sister and then rely on divine protection. But unlike what Pharaoh had done to Sarah, the king did not abduct Rebekah at once. Therefore, after Isaac had already been there a long time, he decided that he no longer needed to be so circumspect. Avimelech, king of the Philistines, this would have been in the Negev, in the Gaza region, looked out of the window of his marital place, and he caught sight of Isaac gladdening his wife, Rebekah, in the course of marital intimacy. Avimelech summoned Isaac, and he said, so she really is your wife. How could you have said she is my sister? Isaac answered him, for I thought, lest I die because of her. I mean, that's a good explanation, right? Avimelech then said, what have you done for us? What have you done to us? I, the most preeminent amongst the people, could easily have had relations with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us with a married woman. What is this called? There's a term for this in English. It's when somebody's feigning purity or feigning innocence. How do you say that in a nice way in English? Right? Okay. Avimelech issued an order of warning to all of his people. Whoever lays a finger on this man or his wife will surely be put to death. Isaac sowed grain in that region and in that year, and this is the verse which I want to draw your attention to, being that it was not a particularly fertile area, 158, you go to the middle of 158. We continue in the middle of 158. Being that it was not a particularly fertile area, and it was also a year of famine, he estimated that it would be of a small yield. But he nevertheless reaped 100-fold more than he expected, for God had blessed him. That's nice. He got 100 times more than he expected. Wow. Imagine you get that kind of yield from your investments. Very nice, very impressive, right? Furthermore, when they then calculated the yield for the purpose of taking tithes, they found that it had miraculously increased 100-fold again in the merit of his intention to tithe it, for God had blessed him. Now it's interesting, in the English translation, it says 100-fold twice. I don't know why.
26, where are we? 26.
We're in verse 12. I don't know why the English translation says twice that he was blessed 100-fold. It doesn't say that in the Hebrew. Let me see if there's another translation here. Might have a different way of looking at it. I'm just looking at a different chumash right now to see if they have a better translation, because it doesn't say in the original Hebrew. Yeah, it's the middle of 158. Here. Here, let's see in this. I'm looking at the good Chumash. Yitzchak sowed crops in that land, which was not as fertile as the main part of the land of Israel, and he found even in that year, which was a bad one for crops, that the land yielded 100 times more than the average, and God had blessed him.
Pretty much the same.
No, it doesn't. It's not. It's very different. It only says once. Let's just see the commentaries. What?
It says if the word again, that means twice.
I know, but why is it bolded? I don't know why.
The English added the interlineation. That's again.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure why they did that. Let's just see some of the commentaries. How did they know the land yielded 100 times more than average? Rashi says that they had estimated how much the land was fit to produce, and it produced 100 times measures for each measure that they had estimated. In other words, if they estimated that the land was going to produce a small amount because it was a year of famine, it produced 100 times their expectations. That's the first interpretation of Rashi. The second, our rabbi said that the purpose of this estimate was for separating tithes. Okay, medrash. There's a principle that God's blessing does not rest on something which is weighed, measured, or counted. However, in the case of measuring for a mitzvah, this principle does not apply. Therefore, Yitzchak measured the field for the purposes of tithing. That was the reason why he measured the field. He had to make an appraisal to figure out how much he's going to have to tithe. Gerar, which is the Maharal, I believe, he says, we see from the Medrash that Rashi's two comments are one single explanation. Yitzchak measured the field specifically for a mitzvah, and therefore he received God's blessings. This is the interpretation of the Maharal of Prague. Now, the way the Rebbe reads the verse is a little bit differently. Just to give you a little context on what's going on over here. Isaac was a year of famine, so Isaac wanted to leave the land. He wanted to go out of the land of Israel because, that's what Abraham had done. Abraham went down to Egypt. So he wanted to go down out of the land. The problem was, Hashem tells him, live in this land and I will be with you and I will bless you. What was going on over there is that God says to him, I don't want you to leave the land, because if you do, he was actually, remember, he was offered as an offering upon the altar. So he was considered sanctified like an offering, and an offering which is sanctified is not allowed to leave the borders of the land of Israel. So Isaac was therefore not allowed to leave the land of Israel. That's what God had told him. So God says, stay in the land, I'll bless you. And that's why it says he got 100 times. Now, what does it mean 100 times? The first interpretation was, like we learned, 100 times more than the expectation. But the second interpretation is that after he separated the tithe from everything that grew, a miracle happened, that the produce multiplied 100 times more than it was before, more than it was beforehand. So the first interpretation is 100 times more than anticipated. The second interpretation is that after he separated the tithe, after the tithe was separated, and now, in other words, he had finished his net, when he had received his net, So I would say like this. The first interpretation is 100% of gross expectation, right? The second interpretation is 100 times net after tithing, right? Now, the question that the Rebbe asks, and again, I still don't know why. I still don't know why it says in our Chumash 100-fold again. I don't know where that comes from. Let me see it in the commentary. He quotes Likutei Sichos 5. Interesting. So he quotes the Rebbe in the comment in the footnote. He does mention Likutei Sichos 5, which is possible that the Rebbe adds that in. Okay, fine. So maybe that's where it comes from. What were you about to say, Steve?
No, I said footnote 32.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Rebbe asks a question here. The Rebbe asks the question over here. The Rebbe says, why? Okay, according to the first interpretation, we got it. 100 times the gross, okay, gross expectation, fine. But according to the second interpretation, 100 times of the net, okay? That's the second way to interpret what happened here. But why does it have to say 100 times the net after he separated the tithes? It's the net after whatever he did to it. What about paying his workers? Why doesn't it mention paying his workers? You want to say net, just say whatever he was left with. Why does it have to say net after tithing? Like, why is that even important? It's what?
It's a tithe to this king. It's not a tithe to Hashem. It's not a
A
tithe.
tithe? No, what do you mean a tithe?
The tithe to
I
It's
thought
a
it was
tithe to
tax.
Hashem.
Was
No,
it
it's a
tax
tithe.
to the king
No,
or
it's a tithe to Hashem. He
Okay.
dedicated to Hashem. Yeah,
Okay.
Yitzchak was the first to give a tithe to God.
The answer is that it wants to show that if you had 100 and you give 10, you have 90. So it's not going to cost you to tithe because God blessed you 10 times of the 90. So you at the end
100
of the
times,
game,
90,000.
have more than you gave before to tithe.
Again, say that one more time. I missed that. Go
Some
ahead.
people think by giving a tithe, you're going to have less money.
Okay,
Okay, but Judaism shows that God's going to bless you 10 times that.
right.
So after you give your tithe, you're going to end up with
More.
than you gave
Okay.
before you gave
All right,
your
fine, it's
tithe.
fine. All right, we're going to move in this direction. Okay, I'm just going to comment on that in just a moment. So I just want to point out how the Rebbe reads this Rashi, okay? Because the Rashi, sorry, Toby, can you move the I just want to point out how the Rebbe reads this Rashi. The Rebbe says that in this Rashi, the first there's actually two different interpretations. The first one is that it was 100 times of the gross expectation. But according to the Rebbe, when it says, a rabbi said that the purpose of this estimate was for separating tithes, the Rebbe points out that that's actually a second interpretation of how the 100-fold happened, which means the Rebbe interprets it to mean that it was somehow a result, that it was the net, basically. It was 100 times the net. But now the question is asked, that the Rebbe asks, why is it that it was necessary to even mention that he did the tithe? Who cares? He had all sorts of deductions, right? And why don't we list all the other deductions that he had, right? The expenses of his expense account, accounts payable.
You said this is the first tithe to Hashem.
Yes, this is the first tithe.
Teach us to do
Right.
tithe.
Actually, no, Abraham also gave a tithe. Abraham also gave a tithe. There was Abraham also gave a tithe. The Rebbe points out over here. Sorry, what were you about to say?
Teach us to give tithe.
Okay, so therefore, the Rebbe interprets over here a very, very, very beautiful message. The Rebbe is trying to teach us. Sorry, the Torah is trying to teach us. Our sages are trying to teach us in this Rashi, as taught by Rashi, that there's a direct connection between the mitzvah of tzedakah, of charity, and the overwhelming blessings of wealth that come from heaven. It's a direct connection. Why was Yitzchak worthy of getting this extraordinary windfall of 100-fold? It was only because he gave the meiser, because he gave the tithe. God made this extraordinary miracle. Can you imagine? He had a net collection in a silo. Okay, it was also livestock. And suddenly, it miraculously multiplies 100 times. I mean, this is like a very, very big miracle. Can you imagine you check your bank account and you have X amount of dollars. The next morning, it's 100 times. Like, how did that even happen? It was after he tithed, right? The Rebbe points out that this is a miracle that God will give you if you go through the extraordinarily counterintuitive exercise of tithing. One certainly thinks that by tithing, by giving 10% of your earnings to charity, to Hashem, you are now depleting your principal. You're shrinking your principal, and therefore I'm left with not 100% of what I had. I'm left with 90% of what I had. Comes the Torah to teach us that when you take away that tithe for God, you're not depleting your principal. You're making God a partner in your enterprise, and when God becomes a partner in your enterprise, things expand in extraordinary ways. The principal will expand.
He replaces more than you give.
Exactly, it replaces much more than you give. In this case, 100 times. There's a beautiful story in the Gemara in the Gittin, which talks about one of the wealthy men of Jerusalem during the times of the destruction of the temple in the days of the Romans. His name was Nakdimon ben Gurion. There's beautiful stories about how he got his name. Something to do with the sun standing still. Miracles of how he would sponsor the water of the pilgrims going up to Jerusalem. Nakdimon ben Gurion's daughter was found by one of the rabbis collecting animal dung by hand. So she'd have, I don't know what she was doing with it, eating it. It was a time of great famine. And she was extraordinarily humiliated to have to collect this dung. Can you imagine the daughter? It's like the daughter of the wealthy person, of the great philanthropist. So he stopped her and he said, "Why? What happened to you? What happened to you that your father's house lost their wealth?" So the Talmud says that she answered him 3 words: Melach, Mamein, Chesed. The salt of your money is kindness, is Chesed. The salt, S-A-L-T. The salt of your money is kindness. What does that mean? It was a code she was saying to the rabbi. What does salt do to meat?
Preserves it.
Preserves it. But what else does salt do to meat?
It brines it. Cooks
It also makes it shrivel up. So when you put salt into meat, it takes the water out and makes it smaller. So the salt decreases the size of your meat, but as a result of that counterintuitive process, it actually gives it a far longer life. In the same way, if you want to salt your money, she said to the rabbi, if you want to preserve your money, you got to do kindness. Like the salt, which shrinks the size, the kindness will shrink the size of the original principle, but it will preserve it. She was intimating that her father had not given enough charity. Now, he had given astronomical amounts to charity, as indicated by the story I just shared with you, that he paid for the waters of the pilgrims to the point that he mortgaged everything he owned. It was an amazing story. But apparently she was saying to the rabbi that when God gives you more wealth, you're being tested. In other words, if you've earned $100 and you're able to peel off $10, I remember when I was a young bar mitzvah boy and I was earning 100 rand a week.
100 grand?
100 rand, South African rand. No, I wish it was Krug rand. South African rand. And I would peel off the 10 rand in order to give to charity. It was very painful. It's hard. But it was a beautiful educational experience. I would give it to charity lovingly, knowing that Hashem is my partner. And it's easy, maybe it's easy when it's 10 rand, but what happens when you're making 100 grand a week? US dollars, 100 grand. Are you able to write a check for $10,000? I know people that have never in their life ever written a check of $10,000 to charity. I had a fellow in our community who was dying from liver disease. And, we were talking and we were just discussing the various things, that spiritual tools for healing and divine intervention. And we spoke about charity. At one point, he handed me an envelope and he said, "Rabbi, this is more charity than I've ever given in my entire life." And he donated it to the synagogue. And of course, I blessed him. Days later, he was notified that suddenly, miraculously, a liver became available. And this guy who was all yellow, his eyes were yellow, his whole face, everything was yellow. Remember the story? Remember the story? He bounced back. The guy remarried. He looks 20 years younger. He's gallivanting around town. He's playing golf. He's living life. He's living life. And I said to him, it was the charity that you gave, which is more than ever you've given in your entire life, that I believe is the conduit to the blessing. You want to preserve your money, your meat, salt it. You want to preserve your wealth, give it away to charity. You've got to give a minimum of 10% because God is testing you. Now, if you've earned $18 million or $180 million or $1 billion, you're being tested. It's a lot of money to give to charity. A tithe of $1 billion is $100 million, I think, right? Even though $1 trillion, how much is $1 trillion? How much is $1 billion? $1 billion is
1,000 million.
1,000 million. How much is $1 trillion? Do you know?
1,000 billion.
I don't think it's 1,000 billion.
Depends. In the UK, it's different.
Right. I think it's 100 billion.
In the UK.
I think it's 100 billion, which is kind of interesting, right? Why do we do that?
The UK does it. We don't.
Oh, it's the UK. UK is 100 billion.
Interesting. We really needed to know that.
Yeah. I mean, look, some of our members they struggle with these questions. Yeah, you got to do the math.
Our debt is 32. What's our debt? $32 trillion.
38.
Point is, friends, if you've earned $1 trillion, think about that. If you've earned $1 trillion, are you even capable? How much is the tithe of $1 trillion? I mean, depending on the UK or American method, right? Are you even capable of writing that kind of check to charity, to tithe to God? This is the message that we're learning today from Isaac. Isaac teaches us that the reason why he was blessed this way is only because he gave the tithe. It wasn't that it was an argument in the Rashi, whether it was 10 times, 100 times the gross or 100 times the net. It wasn't like a technical argument here. This was an existential argument within Rashi. When the rabbis came in, they said, no. It wasn't 100 times the gross, it was 100 times the net. This wasn't an accounting dispute. This wasn't a bookkeeping bookkeeping dispute. What this was an essential disagreement on how the money works, on how God's blessings work. God blessed him not just because it was net. God blessed him because he had the courage to give away that tithe. And that's why the sages were not happy with the first answer. They said, no. The reason why he made this money is because he had given the tithe. It wasn't that it was net, it was because it was a tithe. And from here we learn a foundational principle in our divine service. A Jew needs to know that all the money that he has is from God. It all comes from God. And when you give to charity, you're effectively giving God's money to charity. Right? And that's why the obligation and the merit lies on every Jew to separate from his money to God so that God can bless them 100 times over. It's a test. It's essentially a test. It's essentially a test. You know, it's interesting. I was having a farbrengen with Simon Jacobson. Rabbi Simon Jacobson, one of the great thinkers of our generation.
Absolutely.
He wrote a book called Towards a Meaningful Life. And he asked me a question. You know, we were talking about this YouTube. We were talking about YouTube. And we were talking about, you know, he has, I think, over 500,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is, it's really unbelievable. You know, some of the big non-Jewish teachers have like millions of subscribers. I don't know if there's any rabbi that has millions of subscribers of YouTube. But we were talking about it because, you know, we have a nice following here on YouTube. And he asked me an interesting question. He said, you know, because I had asked him, what's the value of teaching Torah to non-Jews? Are we supposed to teach Torah to non-Jews? And he said to me, out of 8 billion people in the world, how many of the people in the world are solving their problems with values of Buddhism? What's the answer? Of 8 billion people in the world, how many of them are solving their problems with the values of Buddhism? A very large amount, right? You know, they talk about all sorts of meditations. I mean, I don't know anything about Buddhism, but, you know, they talk about it a lot. And then he asked me, and how of the 8 billion people in the world, how many of them are solving their problems with the values of Hasidus Chabad? How many of them are using Tanya and Chabad Hasidus to solve their problems? It's minuscule. You know, yesterday at the banquet at the international convention, one of our members had a problem with his phone, and it was a significant problem for him at that time, things considered. And it was amazing to me, as he said to me, that the way that he maintained his balance, maintained his mindset throughout, was based on the values that we've learned together, the values of Hasidus, the values of Torah that we've learned. And I said to him, this is so magnificent to be able to live your life in a way where you're actually applying principles of Torah in order to guide your choices and decisions of your daily routine. Scaling your problems with Chabad Hasidus values is what it's all about. And this is what Simon Jacobson was saying to me. He's like, of course, David, you should be on YouTube. Of course, that goal is not to keep these teachings a secret. The goal is to fill the world with the knowledge of God like the waters cover the ocean bed. We've got to reach out to Jews and Gentiles alike. This is what it's all about, to inspire the world with the values of the mysticism of Torah, of Hasidus Chabad. That's our mission. That's our goal in this world. In exactly the same way, we have here an opportunity for Jews and Gentiles alike. You want to be successful. You want to prosper. You want to become fabulously wealthy. The message is counterintuitive. Then give it away. Not all of it away. Give away 10%. Now, it has to be to a bona fide charity. You can't give it to some charlatan charity that has 501c3 for technical reasons, that has a nonprofit status by the IRS for technical reasons. There are many, many thieves out there that will take your money in a heartbeat. I mean, there are Jewish organizations, I hate to say it, that are not representing themselves properly. I hate to say it. I hate to be so blunt. You need to know the people behind the charity. It's very, very important. You can't just see something which has Israel in its name, or has IDF, or has something which appeals to you in its name. They are preying on unsuspecting American tourists and philanthropists. You've got to know the people that you're giving to, right? And I don't think that giving to nature sanctuaries or giving to animal sanctuaries is considered tzedakah, right? I think you got to give either to indigent people, people that are indigent physically, financially, or people that are indigent spiritually. This is tzedakah. And this is the message that we're supposed to learn, because the very word in Hebrew for tithing is the word for wealth. Aser is tithe. Ashir is wealthy. It's exactly the same word. Ayin, shin, resh. In Hebrew, there's no vowels conspicuous, not like English, A-E-I-O-U. In Hebrew, the vowels are invisible. So when you have a letter, shin, if the dot is on the right side, it's a shin. If the dot's on the left side, it's a sin, right? The way to remember that is, she is always right. That's how you remember it. She is always right. If the dot's on the right, it's a she. If the dot's on the left, it's an S, right? So in Hebrew, that's a hidden vowel. It's a hidden dot. So Ayin, Shin, Resh, those three letters spell wealth, and they spell tithe, because in the very word, God is telling us in the holy tongue, in the divine language, God is telling us, you want to become wealthy, I am testing you to see whether you are capable of giving a tithe, of giving a tenth of your earnings to charity. What was your question?
I was going to ask a question on the partial. I go from wild. Something different than
Something different. So let me just answer these questions over here, because these questions are in fact relevant. Somebody's asking a question: is helping your own child who needs help financially giving tzedakah, or must it be a stranger? I think it is. If is helping your child considered tzedakah? I mean, I would think that it's look. And now again, if you're giving them, the question is, what are you giving them? Are you giving them just because they can take a cruise, a vacation, a luxury, or are you giving them for a necessity? I can tell you for sure that if you're sponsoring your child's Torah education, then that would in fact qualify. If you're sponsoring a second house in the Caribbean, yeah, then that wouldn't count. But if you're giving them food so that they can live, if you're paying their rent, I think that would count.
Is the 10% to any charity or some? For example, if you give money to a museum, is that considered?
I don't think so at all. Why would we be giving money to a museum? Tzedakah? So you can take a dinosaur bone and put it behind a piece of glass for the next 100 years. I don't see why that's tzedakah.
No, I gave to the Holocaust Museum when they opened.
Is giving the Holocaust Museum tzedakah? I don't think so.
So
I don't think so. I believe that it's people that are financially indigent and people that are spiritually indigent. Now you want to give them, that's very nice, but that doesn't come out of your 10%. In other words, listen, I got all sorts of obligations. I pay taxes, but it doesn't come out of my 10%. I pay tuition, but it doesn't come out of my 10%. I got to be able to, I've got to be able to make sure to allocate that the 10% that I give to charity is going to the proper causes. I can't just go. You can give it to your shul, which for people that are spiritually indigent. You can give it to a Torah education. You can give it to people that don't have what to eat. Does giving drones to the IDF count?
Yes. Pardon me, I'm on
Life-saving. It's life-saving.
But when you say
It's an interesting question. I don't know. What? Go ahead. I'm sorry. What?
How do we learn?
Yeah, go ahead.
What's the easy way of understanding what is tzedakah and what's not?
What's the easy way to understand what is tzedakah? Giving it to people that are in need spiritually or financially. I don't think a museum is either one of those categories.
Individuals.
So is the UJA financially?
That's a very good question. Now, I'm not here to blast any charity.
Or-
I'm not here to blast any charity, but I want to ask you. You have to ask yourself that question. You have to ask yourself that question. How does it work? Is that a good charity? I don't know. You're gonna have to figure that out. I'm gonna give you the principles, and you can apply it.
Thank you.
Okay? People that are financially indigent and people that are spiritually indigent.
And organizations that serve.
There are charities that have been recently exposed. I mean, especially one that comes to mind that is very, very upsetting. It's very, very upsetting to me personally. People have donated to this charity under the unsuspecting premise that it was going to a specific cause and it was falsely represented. And I'm very, very upset about it. I'm not going to say who it was. You can probably figure it out yourself. But it's very upsetting. Hundreds of millions of dollars were donated.
Well, there are a lot of fraudulent charities.
Hundreds of millions of dollars were given, and they did not go to the place that it was supposed to go. It's very, very upsetting.
One or the other.
Yeah.
Both.
So at the end of the day, guys, this is the bottom line. I'm going to wrap it up over here. Isaac becomes fabulously wealthy because it's not a technical bookkeeping detail. The Torah is telling us it was 100 times of the net after charity, after tithing. Now, you got to be careful with how much is your tithe. Do you know how much you earned? Give a tithe. You got to give a tithe.
Is the tithe based upon earnings
Or
Gross or net?
or net assets? Don't forget, he was very
net assets? Like net assets, like balance sheet? You're an accountant.
His father gave him all his wealth.
Right. So he had to give 10 of the gift. It's like a gift tax. I think you have to give a tithe of your house value. What?
Now you're saying net income. You're saying net worth.
I didn't say net worth. I said no. I said
You
earnings.
said gift tax. That's net worth.
Okay, forgive me. I don't know all the terms, the exact accounting terminology. I'm just going to say this. I'm going to say that of 10% of your earnings, you got to give 10% of your earnings. You got to know how much you earn.
Earnings are income.
Isn't it net?
Isn't it the same thing? Am I
No,
making a
net
mistake?
income
Could be an
After all your
inheritance. Could be an
expenses.
inheritance too.
Oh,
After all your
You mean net or gross?
Yeah.
I believe it's gross.
Gross.
Any questions?
Yeah, it's net.
You say it's net?
Absolutely.
So do you have to pay tithe before taxes, after taxes?
After tax.
After tax.
And other expenses.
Because you don't have the money necessarily. I was taught it was after taxes.
Look, maybe I'm not earning enough, but I'm giving before taxes. That's how I'm doing it. I'm
We had
giving
this
gross.
discussion with Mickey.
And you know, maybe when you're making more money and it becomes more, I want to look into that. I'm going to get back to you about that. Okay. I want to get back to you about that, about net and gross, because it could be when you're making a lot more money, when you have more assets, then it becomes a lot more of a difference
I thought
in the
range was
spread.
10 to 20.
What?
I thought the range was 10 to 20.
Yes, you're supposed to give no less than 10%, the bare bones minimum of 10%, and you should not be giving more than 20%. How about your deduction for Social Security? Goes to those that are retired and in need. Are they in need? Are they really in
Maybe
need?
not. We want a needs based.
I don't know. I'm not sure. Is that? I don't know enough about that to be able to answer the question. How do you find out? How do you find out a charity false? I think you got to do your research, Linda. You got to check it out. Do your research. Find out. Speak to the people. Ask them how much of my dollar is going to other expenses. Right? Do your research and don't be a fool. Don't be a fool. All right. All right. Oh, you had a question. Sorry. Go ahead.
Reading the Parsha this week.
Yeah.
Not to do with this. And reviewing Zohar this week.
Okay, I'm gonna sign off over here because that's a different topic. Have a great day, everybody. Shalom.